My name is Dustin Wheeler, and my family calls me Duck Duck. My love of wine created the Duck Vine. The joy and passion I have for wine is a bottle of knowledge I want to share with you. Let me be your favorite certified sommelier and pour you a big glass of edutainment, so you can sit back, swirl it, sniff it, and sip it as we ducks fly together through the wine world. Let's duck and go! Hello, everybody. It is so good to be back. I know that there was a little hiatus there. But if you noticed, especially those longtime listeners in the intro, nice little verbiage change happened where now I am your favorite certified sommelier. So we did pass that exam finally, and we've already started studying for the advanced level. So we're right back at it, just like we're going to be right back into the podcast. Now we've had a few episodes under our belt, especially about making the wine. So I wanted to start comparing some of these wine methods. This can range from how crops are grown to how the wine's made, but can often become subcategories when you're shopping for some of your favorite wines. So today we're talking about some very trendy words in the world of wine, which is natural, biodynamic, and organic wines. So let me give you a little bit of background. What a lot of vineyards have been doing for a long time is considered just the conventional style of grape growing. They focus solely on the grapes and the vines. They use herbicides, pesticides, and insecticides to protect their crops, especially from pests and diseases, so they can really maximize the yields and the qualities of the vineyard. This is what pretty much like 95% of what wines are out there are done in this method. So you won't find any labeling or any kind of certifications. But this has kind of gained a lot of momentum from 80s, 90s, 2000s to garner attention into these other methods. And there's two main issues with kind of this conventional style. One being the image that the public associates with using chemicals. I mean, we hear that term in anything and we kind of all like take a step back and like, what's going on? And especially at any point in today's world, when those chemicals are brought up, you know, some people may even go as far as to say they're poisoning us or it's killing us. Let me stop there and just highlight what they're doing in farming or viticulture to protect the crops is so expensive that they could not be doing it in levels intense enough to harm us. Are they good for us? No. Could they kill us? Absolutely not. The amount of money that they would take, there would be no profits for them. And if they're doing these other steps, let's be honest, they're a business first. They're not going to just lose their profits to just spraying chemicals everywhere. So I just kind of wanted to address that before we go into a deeper dive. What I think the bigger issue is here, and what we're seeing more and more of as vineyards are getting older, is the balance of the vineyard itself, the ecosystem. So let's go back, way back, to a creation called NPK fertilizer. Some people may understand those letters, but I'll explain it here in a second. This is a creation of a German professor from 1830, Justus von Liebig, who is often referred to as the father of fertilizer. He proved that you could have a crop thrive with the correct proportions of NPK. NPK is nitrogen, phosphorus, or potassium, and potassium. You can go to Home Depot or Lowe's or wherever, and you'll find like 10-10-10 fertilizer, or 20-10-20, like, and basically it's balancing those three, because those are very impactful to a successful plant life. You can adjust those and really bring out the best in your plant life that you're trying to focus on. The problem with this is that it becomes so focused on making one particular plant successful, it starts to take away from things that are naturally made or produced. And so the environment around them becomes deficient. It becomes a weakening ecosystem. There have been huge movements to have more biodiversity in the vineyards and to try to bring more nature back to them. And so that's really what biodynamic and organic and natural really are kind of leaning towards. We're going to break these down because there is, I think once you see the end of the podcast, you'll understand how to break these down in kind of just 10 little second snippets. But especially if you go look at pictures of Napa, especially when it first started or the 80s or 90s, it was just rows and rows and rows of vineyards and nothing else on the ground. There was like no trees in the middle, like maybe way out in the distance you saw some trees, no like other bushes, except maybe like right where the winery was. So that's something that it's starting to change, because once you remove all that stuff out of the vineyard, your soil starts to change. And this is very common in all forms of farming. I've been watching Clarkson Farm on Amazon, and that is a battle that they're constantly going through. All farmers do this. My family is a farmer for Gerber, and they have to measure compounds in the soil every year because it changes. As plants take things out, they don't always put it back. So farmers will have all that land and they'll actually move crops year to year. So maybe in 2000 you have wheat in field 1. By 2005 you have to move the wheat to field 2 because it took everything it could out of field 1. So that's kind of what we're talking about being an issue here. Since we're talking about biodiversity changing in the vineyard, I think we just go ahead and go to the term that sounds a lot like it, biodynamic. So biodiversity, biodynamic, what is it? Biodynamic methods have really been used by farmers for centuries. And it's an interesting kind of philosophy for it. The term for biodynamics came into being in the 1920s and was based on a teaching from the Austrian philosopher Rudolf Steiner and his student Maria Thun. Biodynamic farming involves managing a farm organically as a living organism. In the vineyards, this could mean that they plant by moon phases. They try to align the vineyards with ancient ley lines. It gets very involved with the stars and not your typical calendar. Biodynamic goes even a step further, and they'll say it sits kind of in the spiritual plane, and it's kind of in this middle earth between the heavens, and it's really a unique take on it, and it develops a different kind of connection. There's like a herbal connection as well. They'll use homeopathic teas made from indigenous plants, and then they spray them on the vines to dynamize them, give them like this cosmic energy to them. Vineyard practices such as pruning are actually done according to the movement of the moon and the 12 houses of the zodiac. So if you start to hear some of these things and think back to when did wine start, in Georgia thousands of years ago, but even in the 1400s, they're using moon phases and stars. They don't have the calendars on their phones. They don't, so they figured out other ways that made sense. And now we've certified and put some connection to it. Now, as a step further, it's not just when are we when are we pruning the vines? When are we planting, which direction? There's steps in the vineyard too. So obviously this is a very natural kind of approach. So natural fertilizers, they'll take cow horns. You can find pictures of these pretty much anywhere online. They fill them with manure and then they bury them in the vineyards as fertilizer. So they won't be spraying any kind of compounds or anything like that. Now, while this practice sounds great, we're not using machines in the vineyards. We're using cows and animals, maybe goats to munch on the grass and keep it cut down. And we're using a horse to plow between the vine rows. It's really a great practice, but also has some downsides, as all things do in life. It's not always the best option for farmers, especially dependent on their location. We've talked about how grapes need to kind of fight or be stressed to be successful, and water is obviously one of those ways. But instead of having direct amounts of huge rainfalls, typically we'll go to a dry area where maybe there's rivers, and that will allow moisture to hang in the air, and mildew becomes an issue. So there's not really a way in the world of biodynamic farming to help protect against mildew. So if you really want to be biodynamic or enjoy biodynamic wines, if that's your lifestyle, think about the areas of the world that may be a little bit more prone to mildew. You probably won't find a lot there, because even if they do pull it off, it's going to be super expensive, more so than biodynamic wines already are. Goal of biodynamics is to align all the forces of nature to try to create a natural harmony just to the vineyard. There is an organization that certifies it, the Demeter organization. Now, I mentioned earlier, there's a stat out there that says about 5% of all wineries are biodynamic or organic, but it's something that's definitely growing. And the Demeter organization said in 2020, they certified 17,076 vineyards. So it's something that is becoming more prevalent. We will talk about, before this podcast ends, about how to find some of these wines, okay? But before that, let's talk organic. So biodynamic, kind of the farm, how do we plant, how do we prune, what are we using to do that? Organic farming looks at the vineyard holistically. It rejects the use of synthetic chemicals and fertilizer. And this method really hones in on trying to make the vineyard as strong as it can be to support healthy soils, balancing the ecosystem, but naturally protecting from diseases and pests. We'll also see a lot of biodiversity in this, and a big part of it is secondary crops. So this can not only lead to influenced flavors. One time I got to try a wine that was from a nature preserve in Spain. It was really cool how this came to be. They had to get all these government approvals to be able to put their winery there. It's made of all glass, so it almost looks like it's not even there at certain times of the day. But part of the rules were they couldn't cut anything, they couldn't remove anything that grew naturally, they had to leave. And one year, violets took off like wildfire. And that particular vintage had a very strong presence of violet, even more so than what you would typically see in wine. So it's really cool. But this also encourages other wildlife to flourish. It creates a place where nature can be happy again. And part of that creates a little bit of competition in the world. So it makes it harder for one pest to kind of like take over. So naturally we can reserve some pesticides by having this biodiversity because there's competition there. So they kind of chase each other off. So that's a win. As an example, instead of using a synthetic compound to rejuvenate the soil, if it's low on magnesium, farmers may use instead something natural occurring, such as like Epsom salt. It's packed with magnesium. It's neutral on the pH scale. It occurs naturally with our planet, and it just makes a lot of sense to add to the vineyard. So another use for the all-powerful Epsom salt. There are levels to organic wines. So big picture, there's certified organic wine. There's made with organic grapes. And then sometimes you'll see organic grapes listed as an ingredient. So certified organic wines, it's the most rigorous certification to get, especially out of all of these. It ensures the grapes are grown in certified organic vineyards and that no non-organic ingredients, including sulfur, are used in the winemaking process. Typically, these have a sticker on them indicating fully organic certification. CCOF is the big one, California Certified Organic Farmers. Made with organic grapes. This, if it's on the label, indicates that all the grapes used in the wine are organically grown. However, it does not guarantee that the wine is free from non-organic ingredients. There could be things like sulfur, GMO yeast during the production. So maybe a vintage was lacking. You know, they do the best that they can, but it can also be difficult in certain vintages and hard times. And there are choices that these farmers have to make where it's, I either step out of the certification and produce my wine, or I lose my whole vintage because this year we didn't get any of blah, blah, blah. And it's a real life problem that they have to face. So it makes it very difficult. And if they want to keep the certification, then the downside could be instead of making 20,000 bottles, they could only make 2,000 that year. And so, you know, the ripple effect is just insane. So made with organic grapes, the grapes were grown organically, but we had to do something during the winemaking process, like we talked about in the last couple episodes, that needed help, such as sulfur or a yeast or something like that. This designation may be used by producers who follow organic growing practices, but may not be able to obtain the full organic certification for the winery. So it's kind of like a middle ground, but it's a step in that direction. Organic grapes listed as an ingredient suggests that the wine includes possibly both organically grown and conventionally grown. But it may also mean that there's non-organic grapes were sourced from producers who may not have practice, but maybe they do and don't have any kind of formal certification. So it can be a blend, but you know, part of the wine was organic. Now, natural wines. Low intervention is a term. Natural wines. These are defined by spontaneous fermentation using native yeast. There is minimal manipulation. It's a hands-off kind of method. The winemaker doesn't want to have any influence. These wines are neither filtered or refined, which we talked about. So typically they will have a cloudy appearance. There may be sediment left in the bottles that just fall out of suspension. Filtering and fining typically involve additional substances like collagen or egg whites, which would automatically take it out of being a natural wine. Natural wines are characterized by minimal chemical or winemaking intervention and are often not aged in oak. There is an issue with sulfites. I know people, that's another trigger word. We will do a whole episode on sulfites, but here's a quick thing. Sulfites are not what cause headaches. Sulfites occur naturally in all fermentation processes. Any alcohol you have has sulfites in it. So if you tell me I get a headache every time I drink wine, but I'll pound 6 old fashions, I don't believe you. There's other things that lead to headaches, and we'll talk about that. But sulfites are not what gives you headaches. They help preserve the wine. So this often brings aging capabilities, stability of the wine into question. The wines are produced in smaller quantities. So if you do get natural wines, don't try to age them. Just go ahead and drink them. They are typically more fruit driven anyways because there's no oak behind them. They are just like fresh and young. They don't age them at the winery. Again, no oak. They just release them. So go ahead and pop those bad boys open. Now, the thing with natural wines is they do get a little bit of funk to them. So like I've had a Grenache that was all natural. And typically with Grenache, you get like these strawberry kind of notes. It's very juicy. But this one had sour cherry to it. And that sourness, that bitterness was the natural yeast, the natural fermentation occurring. So can natural wines be certified organic? Yes. If the grapes are grown according to the organic standards, then they can be. Can they be biodynamic? They certainly can, provided that the winemaker follows all those practices we talked about, and especially if they want to have that certified label according to the government. However, because achieving organic certification is more rigorous than being labeled as natural, many winemakers choose to forgo the additional step of being natural because certified is almost more natural than natural, if that makes sense. It's a little weird. So we talked about the three. It can get interesting because like it's confusing too. Biodynamic wines could have more sulfites in them than organic or natural. And where do you draw these lines? All these different certifications, and these certifications are expensive. They're not cheap, and they cost the wineries a lot of money. So even when we go to look for them on labels, you may not find anything, but there's wineries out there that have been practicing biodynamic and organic since the 80s and the 90s, but they have no label for it. Some of the smaller wineries just can't afford to because the yearly government fees on these certifications is so high. It's a unique problem. It's, why do we do that when we're trying to make things healthier? That's a different thing that I don't get into with government. But what I want you to take away is sometimes doing a quick Google search, you'll find out more wines are what we will call practicing, which is they do all the steps of being organic or biodynamic, but they just don't have the certificate. So you can still find tons of options that are natural, organic, biodynamic, even if it doesn't say it on the label. So if you have a favorite maker, doesn't mean you need to go throw them away and find one that has the certified sticker on it. Just do a little bit research on what's important to you. And the best way I can say to remember this is biodynamic is how the vineyard's taken care of. Organic is how we grow the grapes. How do we influence the grapes? And natural is as hands-off as possible. We let nature do its process. So biodynamics, the farm, organics, the grape, natural is the winemaking process. If you want a quick little how to remember these, I hope that helps. Thank you guys so much for your support and being with me through passing in this exam and just continuing to spread the word of the duck vine and following on social media, Instagram, all that. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I know you must have learned something. So until next time, bye-bye.